Do close calls grow bodybuilding? That is a question that we'll tackle here tonight on Strength Addicts on Instagram Live and all social media platforms, powered by Iron Mag Labs. Make your mark with IML. Visit ironmaglabs.com today. So it's an interesting question because when we look back in the sport of bodybuilding, we look at really, really controversial decisions. We look at 1991, Lee Haney, Dorian Yates. We look at 2001, Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler. We look at 2007, Victor Martinez, Jay Cutler. I mean, these are the decisions that really to this day we're talking about. What's going on, Peter Shallow? What's going on, Rock, my man? How are you doing? And I think that close calls are really what grow this sport, especially when it's a valid close call. Now, you know, this past New York Pro, I'm not going to shut up about it. That wasn't a close call. That was Martin spanking Nick Walker. Nick Walker leaves with the win. But I'm talking about close calls. Now, 2007 could be argued was not a close call. 2007 could be argued all day and all night. That was Victor Martinez's show to win, or his show to lose. I mean, reality of the matter is Victor should have won that show, but they gave it to Jay. So maybe that's not a close call. 2001 was definitely a close call. What's going on, Mark? How you doing? Between Ronnie Coleman, who was very much in his prime, and Jay Cutler, who came out of nowhere and won the prejudging, should have won the night show but didn't. We see the same close call in 1991 where Dorian Yates, fresh off of his win at the NOC, went to the Olympia and totally shocked the world and pushed Lee Haney. Lee Haney had to win the posing round because Dorian won the prejudging. Other close calls, you know, that come to mind, in all honesty, you look at 2008, you know, the year that Jay Cutler lost the Olympia to Dexter Jackson. Dexter looked phenomenal. You know, I mean, absolutely phenomenal. Then you look at other years, you know, like, for example, and I know that a lot of people probably won't argue this point at this point now because of, you know, history being, you know, 2020. But back in the day, people were arguing with me on the message boards ad nauseum. But you look at 2016. 2016, Sean Flexitron Roden, late great Mr. Olympia, had Phil Heath on the ropes. Got second place, should have won in my opinion. 2017, Big Ramy comes around, places second, you know. And then 2019, you know, he's out of the top six, I think. I think he did pretty poorly. But, you know, who's to say if Flexitron would have won in 2016, where would bodybuilding be today? So I think that close calls, honestly, if the judging is right, if the scores are transparent, and again, what's transparent? I mean, we're talking about a subjective sport where, you know, one panel of judges may have it this way, another panel of judges may have it this way. This guy may win this show and place third in the next show. And you can't really expect there to be consistency in the judging because, honestly, it's a subjective sport, right? So how can one group see the same thing as another group? But then, you know, there's some pretty clear-cut things, you know, and you can make the argument, well, look, you know, seasoned judges, you know, wherever they are going to pick the right people. Well, I mean, you would hope so. I think the problem, though, with close calls, though, is where you've got, and I actually wrote an article for Iron Magazine, which should be published today or tomorrow on this very topic. If you were to open the books, right, and you were to see how many active, let's use the IFBB, right? Because, you know, there's NGA, there's NABA, there's a whole lot, but let's use the biggest one. I'm checking out new gyms by my new place, not homeless anymore. Well, that's awesome, Rock. That's fantastic. I'm so proud of you. But let's say that you open the books and you were to look at all current IFBB pros, current meaning they paid their dues, they're actively competing. I guarantee you that probably 60, if not 70% of the names that you see, you've never heard of. Some may be from the United States, Canada, but others, especially like from Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia, you've probably never heard of. Now, as I said in my article for Iron Magazine, years ago in the 1990s and the 2000s, you had a lot of guys that would put all sorts of money into their preps, their nutrition, their drugs, their training, their posing trunks, their tans, flying out to the United States, flying out to Western Europe, only to place out of the money each and every single time. My mom's from Chile, Chilean bodybuilder. He passed away recently. His name was Christian Lobarede, okay? Christian Lobarede was known as the Bull in Chile. He won the South American, which is, the absolute biggest, baddest bodybuilding show in South America. It's like the Nationals, the USA's put together. And every time he competed in the United States or in Western Europe, the best he would do is crack the top 10. He was never in a top 6. He was never in a top 3. And he never won a show. But he kept coming back because he could say that he competed in the United States, because he could say that he competed with Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman. Even though he was never in a call-out with them, that was enough for him. Solidify what's going on. So now we come back to my article. B. Lange, what's going on? We come back to my article, and here's the deal. If you have a close call between one of these guys that no one's ever heard of and somebody with a big contract prepped by a big name coach, goes to a big name gym, and that no name can win, then close calls do grow the sport of bodybuilding. But more often than not, that no name is cannon fodder. I don't know if you guys remember, but I used to watch wrestling when I was a little kid. I'm 45 years old. And it used to be that if you want to watch a good wrestling match, you had to get pay-per-view or you had to go to the match itself. And I went to several matches with my dad, and I think I might have gotten pay-per-view a couple times as well. Now, wrestling was on every weekend, every Monday, I think, every Saturday, Monday, I don't know. I don't remember. What would they do for the wrestling shows to make up the time? Because, again, you weren't getting pay-per-view. This was on regular television. Well, like Roddy Piper would go to Adrian Adonis's hair salon or whatever. Mean Gene would do an interview. Bobby Heenan or whatever. They would have like these little skits. And then the matches that they would have guys like the Moondogs, like this complete throwaway tag team. They would have guys you'd never heard of. And their main job was to fight guys like Hogan or Tito Santana or Macho Man and literally just get their asses handed to them. Maybe they would like rake the eyes. That was a very common move for wrestlers that were not very, up and coming. Maybe they'd throw a punch. Maybe they'd miss a punch. But generally, they were there to take the DDT, to take the atomic leg drop, to take the suplex. I mean, they were there to just take a beating. And that was it. Okay? Same thing with these IFBB pros that no one's ever heard of. They go to the shows, they lose. That's what they do. They're cannon fodder, you know what I mean? They're the background guys, the landscape, if you will, for the guys with the big names, with the big coaches, with the big sponsors from the United States, from Canada, from Western Europe. And that's what it is. And that's why close calls, if you know automatically who's going to win in a close call, it's no longer a close call. Now, in my article for Iron Magazine, I also floated the idea of, well, why don't we have, let's say there's 8 judges, why don't we make the audience the 9th judge? Whether it's the audience watching on pay-per-view and or the audience there. The problem, though, is that the audience is every bit much as guilty, if not more, than the judges that prefer the competitors from the United States and Western Europe as the audiences. That's why, again, a lot of people say, well, if the fans had more interaction, bodybuilding would be more fair. I would actually disagree and say, if the fans actually had an equal say with the judges, it would be even more unfair to the guys that no one's ever heard of. When in reality, what it should be all about is muscularity, symmetry, flow, balance, the ability to pose and show the physique, show the positive attributes and hide the flaws, because everyone's got flaws. Everyone's got flaws, but a good poser knows how to show them. And a lot of times, a lot of judges, Big Show, what's going on? A lot of judges now are saying, choose your favorite side. So they're giving the competitor even more of an opportunity to hide their flaws. So a competitor that's really on their game with their posing is basically getting the green light from the judges to obscure that flaw from them. So again, to me, it's one of those things. Thank you, facts, says Peter. To me, it really speaks to how much posing practice you have. And now we get into the whole topic of, do you have a posing coach? Should you have a posing coach? And if you do have a posing coach, is that posing coach going to stay in his or her own lane? Because you don't want a posing coach that's second guessing your nutrition or second guessing your training or second guessing your drugs. But so long as they stay in their own lane and just work with you on posing, it may be worth its weight in gold. But again, we go back to the whole topic of, do close calls grow the sport? There's a lot of ifs there. It's not a simple yes or no type question, as really nothing is in bodybuilding. But overall, though, I guess, do close calls create conversation? Yes. Do close calls create participation? Yes. Do close calls create buzz? Yes. Do close calls create rivalries? Absolutely. And all of these things, whether individually or collectively, do they grow the sport? Absolutely. One last note that I will say before I leave, and also be sure to check ironmaglabs.com for their 4th of July sale. But one last thing that I'll say before I leave is that, I think that this is important to say. I think this is important to say in the context of rivalries, in the context of generating more interest in the sport. It is that a true rivalry is worth its weight in gold. Kai Phil, Jay Ronnie, you know what I mean? You will always get something out of that. People will always want to hear more about that. And then what you have is the fans taking sides. And we don't really have message boards like we used to. We still do, sort of, in some places, but now it's Facebook groups, it's Instagram, it's X, it's YouTube. A lot of the YouTube videos have conversations within them that are almost like the forums. Reddit is kind of like the forums, sort of, but not really. The forums used to be a fantastic place where people could really have it out and really argue it out, and it was a lot of fun. But again, to me, it's all about keeping things interesting, and I honestly think that they could grow the sport. But again, there's so many different things that could grow the sport, and I really hope that you'll check out my article at Iron Magazine, because I really truly believe there is something else I wanted to say, and I cannot remember what it was. So you'll just have to read the article. It's a great article. It'll be available at ironmagazine.com. But I just got to say that when it comes down to growing the sport, I do think that close calls, I do think that they grow the sport. I do think they grow the sport. I don't think anybody's ever going to be happy with a close call. And that's cool. It's fine. It's just that when you have a close call and you know automatically who's going to win. This is what I was going to say. The last point I was going to make, and why I think close calls also grow the sport. And I did mention this in my article, and this is what I couldn't remember, and I want to throw this in there as well. When you have champions like Ronnie, like Lee Haney, like Jay Cutler that have won multiple Olympias, when you have back-to-back Olympia wins, or like the 90s Chicago Bulls, when you go to a show and you know who's going to win, it's boring. People get bored. And that's why I think that the Olympia has sort of had this kind of like unstable kind of dynamic to it since Phil Heath, who won 7. People don't, look, since Phil Heath, he won 7, you had Sean Flexitron Roden, Brandon Curry, Big Ramy, Hadi Chupin, and now Derek Lunsford. You've had 5 Mr. Olympia champions in basically, let's see, 18, 19, 2021, 2022, 2023. So you have had 5 champions in what is that, 6 years? I mean, I'm not saying that it's done intentionally, but I'm just saying when you've got Lee Haney with 8, or actually, you have Arnold with 7, Lee Haney with 8, Dorian with 6, Ronnie with 8, even Jay with 4, Phil with 7. It's those types of like championships get really boring after a while. But we could take Phil out of that because Phil had a loss that broke his reign. He had 06, which he should have won, 07, which he shouldn't have won, 08, which he didn't win, 09 he won, and 10 he won. So is that right? 6 he won, and 7 he won. He shouldn't have won 7. 8 he lost, and then he won 9 and 10. So that is at least interesting, and it's interesting also because nobody's ever lost the Olympia and won it back, and Jay did. Gem Star Boy, what's going on? And Dynamic Fitness, what's going on? So, in closing, yes, I do think close calls grow the sport of bodybuilding with a lot of ifs, but I do think that they do. I think that anytime you can keep a sport with a bunch of oiled up guys on stage interesting, then that's a great thing. But I will tell you that the guys that no one has ever heard of will generally not win. And that in and of itself makes bodybuilding a little bit, because in football, baseball, basketball, hockey, I don't care if people know you or they don't. If you get the home run, the touchdown, the field goal, the basket goes in the hoop, you get the point. In bodybuilding, not so much.